what sport we play, what our weight goal is. Obviously, if we need to gain weight for a certain position, we're going to need to be having more fuel. And it also depends on climate, okay? So when it is colder, we actually require more energy to keep warm. Shivering actually burns energy, okay? All right, so just a quick question. Sorry, it's just frozen. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm just going to launch a poll, just as we did last week. So just got a question up there. What are some of the possible symptoms of inadequate food intake? Okay, so sorry, I'm just... Sorry guys, I'm just trying to launch this poll for you. There you go. So possible symptoms of inadequate food intake. So we've got decreased strength, increased risk of injury, irritability, depression or depressed mood, decreased concentration, or all of the above. So we talked about this last week. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a look at that. I think you all seem to have the right idea there. All right, so I'm just going to end that polling now. Fantastic, you all got that one right. Yes, it is, among many other things. All of those are symptoms of inadequate food intake. So if you are experiencing any of these symptoms, I would highly recommend you have a chat to mum and dad and potentially book in to see a sports dietitian. Just remembering too that your needs are going to be, your nutrition needs are going to be, well, the amount of energy that you need is going to be more than your friends that don't play as much sport as you do. So I know a lot of people do tend to not eat during their breaks at school. It's really important that you guys as athletes do, okay? Yeah, so as I said, just book in to see a dietitian if you are starting to experience any of these symptoms. Okay, so just showing you that relative energy deficiency in sport is what it is called when we're not getting enough energy, okay? And just, again, I did show you this last time, but it just shows you all of the potential symptoms that you can experience if you're not getting enough fuel, okay? Just again, I'm sorry about the quality of that picture there, but the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, but good base diet, as I said last week, it's really important, okay? So we know all our 5 food groups. I don't want to rehash on those too much because it'll take too much time, but just wanting to give you another quick question to make sure you remember from last week. So if I had, so it's the same question. Relaunch poll. Okay, so it's the same question as we had last week. If I had 2 eggs on 2 slices of toast with avocado and a glass of orange juice, which of the food groups are included in this meal? So we've got dairy, grains and cereals, fruit and vegetables, meat and meat alternatives, grains and cereals and vegetables, meat and meat alternatives, grains and cereals, vegetables and fruit. So I'll give you a little bit of time to have a go at that one. It's a bit of a tricky one, actually. I just realised it's different from the one that I had last time. All right, so a couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to end that polling now. Yep, and I'm going to share the results. Oh, excellent. Some of you did get it right. That's fantastic. It was a bit of a tricky one. Okay, so it's actually C. All right, so we've got meat and meat alternatives with our eggs. We've got grains and cereals with our toast. We've got avocado, which is really, like, actually it could be classified as either a fruit or a vegetable, but for the purpose of this, it is listed under vegetable, okay, and a glass of orange juice. So that is a tricky one. I probably should have thought about this question a little bit better. Avocado is technically a fruit, but it is sort of classified in with the vegetables in the 5 food groups. So you've done well on a tricky question, guys. Okay, so just moving on from that one. Okay, so again, just recapping on water and its importance. Okay, it regulates our body temperature through sweating. Okay, when we sweat, it helps us to stay cool. Okay, which is really important. It lubricates and cushions our joints. It moistens our mucous membranes. It aids in our digestion and prevents constipation. It provides transport for our fuel. Okay, so it helps for everything to get through to our muscles. Okay, and it also moisturizes our skin to maintain its texture and appearance. So the symptoms of dehydration, you'll get thirsty, but as I said last time, thirst is not a very good indicator of your hydration status. It's generally the last symptom you'll feel. So please try not to wait until you're actually thirsty to drink. Just keep hydrated all day. Have that water bottle at your desk, take it into your classrooms and sip on it regularly. Okay, it's very hard to catch up on when you're dehydrated. Headaches, feeling tired, mood changes, slow responses, dry nasal passages, cracked lips, dark coloured urine, weakness, tiredness, and confusion and hallucinations are all symptoms of dehydration. Okay, so moving on now to how our body is fueled. Okay, so different nutrients play different roles in helping our bodies to run efficiently and at its peak performance. Okay, so the type of fuel that we choose has a huge impact on our health, well-being, and physical performance. Okay, so our fuel needs to be good quality stuff. All right, so just breaking it down a little bit. So food is our fuel, okay, but our food is made up of 3 macronutrients. So all of the foods that we consume are comprised of carbohydrate, protein, and fat, just to various percentages. So there are some foods that have a higher percentage of carbohydrate than the other macronutrients, and they're your high carbohydrate foods, obviously, okay? So we'll go through what each of these macronutrients and what are good carbohydrate foods, what are good protein foods, and what are good fat foods, okay? So our body also requires water, and it requires vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients to perform at its best. So how do our muscles work? Okay, so to enable our muscles to contract, we need fuel, okay? So our muscles can convert, so when we eat carbohydrate, the carbohydrate breaks down into glycogen in our body, into glucose in our bodies, okay? That glucose is then stored in our muscle as glycogen, okay? And glycogen is converted into fuel, or getting technical here, it's called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And that ATP is used to enable our muscles to contract, okay? So for that conversion to happen, glycogen is essential, all right? So it is the most efficient pathway to enable our muscle to contract. Okay, so glycogen, as I said, it comes from carbs. So like I said last time, I don't recommend that athletes have a low carb diet or go on a ketogenic diet or anything like that, okay, particularly if you are in a sport that requires speed and power and strength, okay? So the other thing with glycogen and carbs is that we only store quite a small amount in our muscles. So we run out, okay? So when you are doing an endurance activity, so anything longer than about 60 to 90 minutes of exercise or training, you're going to need to replenish that carbohydrate, okay? Because once that carbohydrate is depleted, you become much less efficient at getting fuel to your muscle, okay? And that will slow you down. You won't be as powerful or strong, all right? So what happens when we do run out of glycogen in our muscle? I'm sure a lot of you have experienced some of the symptoms that happen when we do, okay? So what happens is we do start to use other fuel sources. So we'll start to use the fat that's stored in our body. But the thing is, it's just a much less efficient process to convert fat into energy for our muscle, okay? So very last thing that will be broken down when we run out of glycogen, when we run out of fat, what will then happen is we'll start to break down muscle tissue, okay, which is definitely not ideal, okay? That is when you're going to lead yourself to the risk of injuring yourself if you continue to do that time and time again. Okay, so some of the symptoms are fatigue, hunger and dizziness, decreased performance and skill. You feel like, so as the picture kind of demonstrates, you really feel like you've hit a wall. Your legs just won't go anymore, or they won't cooperate as, you know, they won't go as fast as what you want them to go. Okay, you'll have reduced power and your concentration will suffer as well. Okay. So with carbohydrate, we have two types. We have our simple carbohydrates and our complex carbohydrates. And both of these carbohydrates have a bit of a role to play for athletes, okay? So complex carbohydrates are really all of the good whole grain carbohydrates that we should be eating at each meal. So they're your breads, your cereals, your potato, your sweet potato, your fruit, that type of thing, okay? The thing with complex carbohydrates is they do take quite a bit for our bodies to break down and for them to be stored in our muscle to be used for energy. Okay, so complex carbohydrates aren't necessarily the best thing to have immediately before you train. Say, for example, you're coming home from school at 3 o'clock, you've got training at 3:30. If you sat down to a big whole grain bowl of cereal or something, you know, really like you know, potatoes and something that takes a long time for your body to break down, you're not going to get the benefit from those carbohydrates in your training session, okay? So simple carbohydrates, they break down much quicker, all right? So you will see they will sort of break down into glucose almost straight away, and they'll be able to be used by your muscle almost straight away too, okay? So when I say to you in a couple of slides' time about some of the simple carbohydrates that I would actually recommend you have in certain situations, you understand why, okay? All right, so examples of your complex and simple carbohydrates. So complex carbohydrates, as I said, your breads, whole grain cereals, rice, pasta, noodles, fruit, your vegetables, lentils and legumes, milk and yogurt, okay, are all complex carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates that break down really quickly are things like your lollies, soft drink and cordial. Some of these things on this list, though, I wouldn't recommend you have, such as soft drink, sports drinks, cakes, muffins, biscuits, ice cream, chocolate, pastries, chips, and refined cereals are all simple carbohydrates. Some of the other things I wouldn't recommend you having in between, just before an event or before your training session are those things that are high in fat, okay? So things like cakes, ice cream, chocolate, pastries are all off the menu if you're just before training, okay? And the reason being is that high fat foods will sit in your stomach for much longer, harder to digest, okay? So I would not recommend that just before training, likely to cause all sorts of tummy issues. Okay, so how much carbohydrate we need? Again, it's dependent on quite a few things as energy levels. So weight, your exercise level, and on days that you have heavy training loads, you're likely to need more carbohydrates than those days where you don't train or you have an off day or just a really light session. So an athlete with a heavy training load should consume between 6 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. Now that's quite a big range, and I don't suggest you go and sort of necessarily calculate for yourself. If you're really interested in how much carbohydrate you specifically need, again, I would probably look at talking to a sports dietitian. It will depend on your exercise level, and some days you might need 10 grams per kilogram, other days you might need 6 or 7 grams per kilogram. Okay, so we should be eating it at regular intervals throughout the day to maximize our muscle storage of glycogen. And as I said before, muscle can only store about 60 to 90 minutes worth of glycogen. Okay, so if your training goes for more than an hour, I would suggest that you need to replenish that carbohydrate during your training session. The thing is too, if you know that your training session is going to be going for say 90 minutes or 2 hours, you need to start replenishing before you hit the wall, okay? Because you can't pick up, once you've hit the wall, it's too late. So I would suggest, if you know for sure that your training or your game is going to go for over an hour, you refuel at 30 to 45 minutes, okay? So if you've got half time at 30 minutes or you have quarter times, then I would suggest that you start refueling then, okay? So I would suggest you have about 30 grams of carbohydrate in the 2 to 4 hours before your training, and about 15 to 30 grams within 30 minutes after training. Okay, so I'll give you a few examples of what that would look like. So 30 grams of carbohydrate is equivalent to a fruit smoothie, about a cup of fruit smoothie, 300 ml flavored low-fat milk, 200 gram tub of yogurt, 3/4 of a cup of rice, a sports bar, 1.5 cups of cereal with milk, 3/4 of a cup of porridge cooked with milk, 2 slices of bread, so just a sandwich, 3 rice cakes, a cup of cooked pasta, half a cup of baked beans or lentils, a large potato or 1.5 cups of sweet potato, a large corn cob, 2 medium-sized pieces of fruit, and 1/3 of a cup of dried fruit. Okay, so some other examples of 30 grams of carbohydrate that are more readily available. Okay, so these are the ones that you might want to be having, say if your game goes for 60 to 90 minutes, these are the ones that you might be wanting to have at half time. Okay, so 500 mils of sports drink, 300 mils of cordial. By the way, you don't have to down all of that 500 mils of sports drink at half time. You can have it at regular intervals. So you can have a little bit at quarter time, a little bit at half time, and a little bit at 3/4 time. 300 mils of cordial, a cup of fruit juice or 250 mils of fruit juice, 35 to 40 grams of jelly beans or jubes, a sports gel. Now with sports gels, I'm not sure whether any of you have tried them before, but I would just use them with caution and always try your strategy, whatever your refueling strategy is, always try it in training. Don't try it in your event. Okay, try it in training first and just see how your body handles it. For example, a lot of the sports gels can cause tummy upsets, okay, because they're quite a big hit of sugar that your stomach sometimes just doesn't like it. Okay, so you might only need to have half a gel and you'll be fine with that. But yeah, like any of these things, always try it in training. Okay. 3 tablespoons of jam or honey, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 2 flavoured ice blocks, a piece of fruit, or 1/3 of a cup of dried fruit is quite easy to digest for some people as well. Some people have a bit of an intolerance to certain fruits, so just be careful there as well. Okay, so another question that I want to ask you guys. So which of the following are all sources of carbohydrates? Sorry guys, just getting the poll up. So we've got baked beans, rice, butter and sugar, potato, pasta, breakfast cereal and eggs, pasta, rice, baked beans and milk, bread, fruit, fish and biscuits. So which one of those are all sources of carbs? Give you a couple more seconds to finish that one. All right, just end that now. Okie doke. So we have, the answer is actually C. Okay, so only 33% of you got that right. And it is a bit of a tricky one. I did try to make it a little bit tricky. Okay, so with the other ones, butter is not a source of carbohydrate, okay? For B, butter's a fat, all right? So potato, pasta, breakfast cereal, and eggs. Eggs are not a source of carbohydrate either. Eggs are a great source of protein. Okay, so C, pasta, rice, baked beans, and milk are all excellent sources of carbohydrate. With baked beans and milk, and we'll find this out a bit in the next couple of slides, they're also good sources of protein, okay, but excellent sources of carbohydrate too. Okay, so D, bread, fruit, no one sort of chose this anyway, but bread, fruit, fish and biscuits, so fish is not a good source of carbohydrate, okay. So perhaps when we finish this, if you just want to go through the slides again, and we do have access to the slides after this is finished, so and just have a bit of a read through the slides again on what foods are carbohydrate foods, okay? All right. Okay. So just moving on now to protein, all right? Protein, again, is an essential macronutrient for you guys. So protein helps our muscle to repair, all right? So what happens when we train, when we, you know, run, when we lift weights, when we come into contact with other people, our muscle actually breaks down. And that's how our muscle adapts. So that's how so bodybuilders and things like that, that's how we build muscle, by it breaking down and by it repairing itself, okay? So to be able to do that, we need to be feeding our bodies protein, okay? Because protein breaks down into amino acids, all right? And those amino acids are used by our muscle to help it repair, okay? So if our protein intake is inadequate, you won't recover from injury as quickly. The following day, you're likely to be really sore, okay? So you're not going to be able to put in as much effort at your training session the next day because you're going to be too sore, okay? Protein, as with carbohydrate, we need to consume it at regular intervals throughout the day, all right? So same sort of thing with carbohydrate. Protein, our muscle only has capacity to utilize quite small amounts of protein at any one time. So really our bodies can only utilize about 25 to 30 grams of protein, okay, at each meal. All right, so if we consume over that, it doesn't necessarily matter, but it's not going to be doing our muscle any more benefit, okay? So it is important, because it takes our bodies probably 24 to 48 hours to recover. We need to be giving it protein at, you know, at least 4 of your meals a day, okay? So I would say include some protein with your breakfast, with your lunch, with your dinner, okay, and also at a mid-meal, so whether it be your recess or afternoon tea or even supper, okay, or dessert, okay. So I find that a lot of the times when people come in to see me, a lot of people are having toast for breakfast with a glass of juice, then they'll have a Vegemite or a jam sandwich for breakfast, for lunch with a piece of fruit, maybe a packet of chips or pretzels or something like that, and then dinner is when they'll consume a piece of meat. Okay, so basically if you're eating like that, you're not getting a sort of good distribution of protein throughout the day, all right? So you need to have a think about that, all right? So have a think about with your breakfast. If you are just a toast person, you need to think about, okay, well, how am I going to get some protein into that meal? It might be, okay, let's have some eggs on toast, or let's have some baked beans, or even a glass of milk with that instead of the juice, okay? So ideally, as I said, a small amount of protein, 15 to 30 grams, should be consumed at 4 meals a day. All right, so what does that look like? Oh, okay, sorry, we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so our best protein choices are lean meats, okay? So lean red meat. So if you are choosing from the shop, you don't want to be able to see too much visible fat. So the fat is the white stuff. If you see a piece of red meat and it's got lots of white stuff on it, then that's the fat, okay? You want to be choosing a leaner cut of meat. So your rump steak, a lot of the steak has fat around the outside that's quite easily removed. You know, those types of cuts are what you're wanting to sort of go for more often than not. So chicken breast, grilled or baked fish and seafood, eggs, nuts and seeds, tofu, legumes and lentils, milk, yogurt and cheese. Now with protein, if you are vegetarian or vegan, it can be a nutrient that is harder to get enough of. So particularly for vegans, vegans are people that eat no animal products whatsoever. So they might be only getting their protein from nuts and seeds, tofu, and lentils and legumes. The thing with those types of proteins is they're not absorbed by our body as readily as those proteins coming from animal products. And the reason being is that the amino acid profile of plant-based proteins isn't the same as our muscle, all right? So with animal protein, because their muscle is very similar to ours, then it breaks down and our muscles absorb it really well. With plant protein, you can still meet your protein requirements, but you need more of it than you would if you were to have an animal-based protein. Okay, so some occasional choices of protein, things that you shouldn't have too much of because they're quite high in fat and they're processed. Sausages, your fattier cuts of meat, your crumbed meat like chicken schnitzels, veal schnitzels, fried fish, deli meats. If you are having deli meats on your sandwiches, it's okay to have them every now and then. I'd probably say no more than 3 times a week if you can. All right, so they include salami, ham, chicken breast, anything that you purchase from the deli, basically. Okay, fish fingers, not great. Salted nuts and chocolate-coated nuts are obviously not the best choice either. Okay, so how much protein do we actually need? Not as much as what a lot of people tend to think. Really, the maximum amount that our bodies need is about 2 grams per kilogram, okay? So it's not a lot. There are people that I've seen that, and most Australians get enough protein, okay? But again, it's about the distribution. So please try not to leave it just till your evening meal to be getting all of the protein that your body needs. All right, so 2 grams of protein per kilogram isn't actually that much at all, okay? So if we just look at foods that provide us with 10 grams of protein. So we've got 2 small eggs, 30 grams of cheese or 1.5 slices, 70 grams of cottage cheese, a cup of milk or soy milk, 35 grams of cooked lean beef, lamb or pork, 40 grams of lean chicken, 50 grams of grilled or canned fish, 200 grams of yogurt, 4 slices of wholemeal bread, 3 cups of whole grain cereal, 2 cups of pasta or 3 cups of rice, 3/4 of a cup of lentils or kidney beans, 200 grams of baked beans, 120 grams of tofu or 60 grams of nuts and seeds. Now, the reason I've listed the breads, some of the breads and cereals in here is because I just wanted to show you that you do actually get small amounts of protein from those foods as well, but it's really small amounts, okay? So a slice of bread contains about like 2 to 2.5 grams of protein. So you need a lot more of that to be able to make up, say, if you want to get your 20 grams of protein in at dinner, if you were relying solely on pasta, you'd need, 4 cups of pasta, okay, to get your 20 grams of protein in. So pasta with a tomato-based sauce after a training session is not really a good enough dinner, okay? You need to be having some kind of protein in with that pasta, so add in some mince, all right, or add in some lentils, okay, if you're a vegan. All right, so our next question. So I'm just going to launch this poll. So which of the following are all sources of protein? So we've got baked beans, eggs, fish and chocolate, red meat, yogurt, eggs and fish, chicken, banana, nuts and milk, chickpeas, turkey, potato and cheese. So I'll give you about 20 more seconds to have a go at that one. All right, so I'll stop the polling now. Okay, so just sharing these results. Majority of you got this one right. So the answer is B, okay? So no one chose A, which is great because chocolate is definitely not a source of protein. Red meat, yogurt, eggs and fish, absolutely. All of those are great sources of protein. Actually, dairy is one of the, like, it's an excellent source of protein to be having after your training session, because dairy, whey protein, it's actually what they use in a lot of the protein powders that you buy from health food shops and things like that. Whey protein is very readily absorbed by our muscle, okay? C, chicken, banana, nuts and milk. Banana is not a source of protein. The others are, so nuts, milk and chicken. Okay, so D, chickpeas, turkey, potato and cheese. Potato is not a source of protein, okay? So chickpeas, look, in saying that, potato does have very small amounts, but I certainly would not be saying it is a good source of protein. So chickpeas, turkey and cheese, all good sources of protein too. If you are relying on cheese for your protein source, you just got to be mindful that cheese is also quite high in fat, okay? So you don't want to be overdoing the cheese. Okay. All right. Moving on to fat now. So fat is the third macronutrient that all our foods are made up of. So we've got carbs, protein and fat. So fat is not evil. Fat is actually a necessary nutrient for many of our bodily functions. It gives us cushioning and support. It helps with our immune function as well and our hormone function. So a lot of hormones require fat, so particularly estrogen for females, okay? If we have a very, very low fat diet, quite often our hormone levels will be affected, and testosterone for boys as well, okay? So a very, very low fat diet can affect a female's menstrual cycle as well. So fat, we don't need much of it, okay? It is very energy dense, so too much in our diet can have unwanted effects, such as unwanted weight gain. And we want to be choosy in the types of fats that we have. So we don't necessarily want to be going out and having chips and chocolate and things like that and pastries, okay? Because those types of fats are saturated fats, which are not great for our bodies. All right, so we want to be getting most of our fat from oily fish, avocado, nuts and seeds, olive oils and plant-based oils, eggs, olives, all great sources of good healthy fats. The ones that we want to try to avoid are your pastries, cakes, biscuits. Coconut is actually a saturated fat too. So I know there's a lot of stuff on the internet about coconut oil being a cure for everything. Actually, it's not a cure for everything. It's very tasty, and used in small amounts, it's totally fine, but I wouldn't be going slathering coconut oil on everything, okay? Chocolate, butter and ghee are saturated fats as well. If you have a little bit of butter on your bread, that's not a problem at all, okay? But if you can use avocado instead of a spread, that's an even better option. Fried foods, palm oil, fatty and processed meats, potato chips, takeaway foods, cream and full fat dairy are all sources of your saturated fats that you don't want to be having too much of, okay? So how much fat do we need? Not much. Like I said, a couple of tablespoons of healthy fat each day. So, you know, half an avocado, or, you know, drizzle some olive oil onto your salads or veggies and things like that, okay? It's really easy to meet our requirements for fat. Use nuts as a snack, or consume some oily fish a couple of times a week too, if you can. Oily fish is a great source of omega-3 fatty acids, which are also really good for inflammation, which I'm sure as athletes you would have quite a lot of inflammation going on in your bodies, okay? Okay, so next question. This is the last question too, guys. So, which of the following are all high in fat? So we've got avocado, butter, biscuits and potato, nuts, pasta, ice cream and chips, bread, cream, cheese, fried chicken, or cake, margarine, nuts and chips. A couple more seconds to finish that one. All right, so I'm just going to end that now, guys. Share the results. Okay. Yeah, so majority of you did answered that correctly. So let's go through the answers. So avocado, butter and biscuits are all definitely high in fat. Potato isn't high in fat. A lot of people do seem to think potato is a really fatty food and they have to avoid it. Potato is an excellent food. It's an excellent source of carbohydrate, excellent source of fiber. Obviously, you don't want to have too much of it, as with anything, but it's definitely not high in fat, okay, unless you fry it, of course, and have it as chips. Okay, so B, nuts, pasta, ice cream and chips. So nuts, ice cream and chips, yes, all high in fat. Pasta is not high in fat, okay? Pasta is a carbohydrate, not high in fat at all. If you add a creamy sauce to it, yes, it then becomes a high-fat meal, but pasta in itself is not high in fat. C, bread, cream, cheese, and fried chicken. Okay, so cream, cheese, and fried chicken, yep, all high in fat. Bread is not high in fat. Bread is a good source of carbs. All right, so that leaves us with D, cake, margarine, nuts, and chips. All those foods are high in fat. All right, so the nuts are a source of healthy fat. The others, I would say, try to minimize in your diet. Okay. All right, just moving on now to vitamins and minerals. Okay, so for athletes, and look, teens in general are at risk of iron and calcium deficiency, but athletes are particularly at a higher risk of deficiency in these nutrients. Okay, so I'll go through each of these in a minute, but basically if you eat a well-balanced diet, you should be able to meet your needs of these nutrients. Okay, some people do struggle to meet their nutrient requirements, like if you are dairy intolerant, or if you don't eat meat, or if you've got absorption issues in your digestive tract, which would have to be determined by a doctor. Okay, so if you're, for example, if your iron levels are low, if you have a blood test and you eat lots of red meat, it might be that you're just not absorbing it very well and there's something going on in your gastrointestinal system that's stopping your body from absorbing it. But your doctor would be able to diagnose that. Okay, so iron. Very important nutrient. It is important in transporting oxygen throughout our body. Okay, it's important for immunity and converting glucose stored in our muscle into energy. So extremely important for athletes. If you're iron deficient, you'll feel really tired. So it's not just, you know, feeling a little bit tired at the end of the day. Everyone feels a little bit tired at the end of the day. It's waking up feeling tired, finding it really difficult to concentrate in class, just feeling like you can't give it your all in training. You know, those types of things are all sort of symptoms that potentially you should get your iron levels checked. Iron can be lost through sweat, bleeding, through our intestines as well, and physical activity. And the thing with iron too, and this is why athletes are particularly at risk, is that actually contact with the ground. So running on hard ground, that heel strike on the ground actually breaks down iron, okay? So that can lead to deficiency or lead to just an increased need for a little bit more of that particular nutrient. Also, if you're playing football or contact sports, that contact with other people, hitting the grounds, again, you're breaking down iron, okay? So you're breaking down cells, which you lose iron through that. All right, so there are various reasons. Your sweat, your body contact are all sort of other reasons why you could become deficient in iron. So where do we get iron from? So first of all, there's two sources of iron. We've got our heme, or two sort of types of iron, sorry. We have our heme iron and our non-heme iron. So with our heme iron, that's absorbed really readily by our body, okay? It comes from animal products. So it comes from beef, lamb, chicken and fish. Offal is things like kidney and liver and things like that. I'm assuming not a lot of you would eat those types of foods, and that's totally fine. You can get plenty just from beef, lamb, chicken and fish. Okay, so body loves it, absorbs it really well, not an issue there, okay, for most people. Non-heme iron, with other sources of iron, like plant-based sources of iron, eggs as well, are non-heme iron. The reason they don't absorb as readily in our body is other things in that particular food may bind it, okay? So, for example, with your, you know, your dried fruit, your leafy green veggies, they're high in fiber, so fiber and phytates, and they tend to bind the iron as well. So your body just doesn't absorb as much through those foods as what it would through your animal products. So again, if you are vegan, vegetarian, iron is a big one to be mindful of, okay? And do get your levels checked by your GP. So calcium, very important again. Calcium strengthens our bones and teeth. It regulates our muscle function, such as contraction and relaxation. So actually calcium and magnesium kind of work together in being able to, if you're getting lots of cramps and things like that, calcium and magnesium, making sure you're getting enough of those can help with that, okay? Regulates our heart function, has a role in blood clotting, and a role in transmission of nervous system messages and enzyme function. All right, so a lot of people, so to get enough calcium, we actually need to be having about 3 to 4 serves of dairy a day, or dairy alternatives. Okay, if you're not having any dairy, or you need to make sure that if you're having a plant-based alternative, so for example almond milk, that's very popular at the moment. Almond milk itself is not a good source of calcium at all, okay, unless it has been fortified. It's the same with rice milk and oat milk and things like that. Soy milk is actually naturally quite a good source of calcium, but any of the other types of milks definitely do not have as much calcium as what dairy has. Okay, so you're looking at getting about 120 milligrams of calcium, and you can read the label and have a look if it has been fortified. So you're looking for calcium citrate or calcium carbonate that's been added to, or calcium phosphate, sorry, that's been added to the almond milk or something, and that it has got the equivalent amount of calcium that that dairy milk does, okay, which is about 120 milligrams per 100 mils. Okay, so good sources of calcium: milk and milk products, and cheese and yogurt, leafy green veggies. Again, with leafy green veggies, same reason with iron, you don't absorb calcium as well as what you would through your dairy, unless you've got like a lactose intolerance. And if you have got a lactose intolerance, I would suggest that you try using a lactose-free milk rather than going for a nut milk or a rice milk. If you can tolerate it, try Zyme or Littles, which are dairy milks that have just had an enzyme added to it that breaks the lactose down for you. Okay, so soy and tofu are good sources of calcium. Fish, so canned fish with the bones, all right? So that's the bit of tends to turn a lot of people off. So if you get a big can of salmon or some sardines, you actually need to crush the bones in with it. If you're going to mash up the salmon, the bones is where you'll get the calcium from. Obviously, do not eat the bones from fresh fish though, okay? In canned fish, they're nice and soft. Nuts and seeds like Brazil nuts, almonds, sesame seed, so tahini, is a good source of calcium, and also your calcium fortified foods such as breakfast cereals, fruit juices and bread. Some have been fortified with calcium. Okay. So just touching quickly on supplements. So supplements can include your vitamins and minerals, sports drinks and gels, protein bars and drinks, creatine, caffeine, liquid meal replacements and herbal supplements. Okay, so if you are going to be using any supplements, I would strongly recommend you talk to your coaches and talk to your doctors about them, okay? There is also a website that you can go onto, and I'm not sure if you guys have done any training on supplements and things like that, but there is actually a website that you can go to check to see if anything that you're taking is banned, okay? So when you get to an elite level, you may start to get tested, so have urine tests and things like that. So it's really important that you check with your coaches and your doctors that the particular supplement. And the thing with a lot of the over-the-counter vitamins and minerals and protein powders, they're not regulated that well, okay? So you've just got to be extremely careful, all right? And I would strongly recommend that you try and meet all of your requirements through diet alone, and it can be done. Okay, so just touching on that point again, best to meet our nutritional requirements through a healthy diet. Supplements in general are not necessary, okay? Sometimes they may be required, but they need to be under the guidance of a sports doctor and or a dietitian. Okay, so just your take-home message from today, guys. What you eat significantly affects your performance, all right? So carbohydrates are essential in providing energy to our muscles. We need to consume carbs at regular intervals, so before training, during training, and after training as well, because carbohydrates also help our muscle to take up protein. So our recovery meal is really important, and you need to contain both protein and carbs. Something I didn't mention is that we should be having our recovery food within about 30 minutes of finishing your training session, okay? So if you're not going straight home to have dinner, I suggest you're in the car on the way home, you have, you know, a squeeze yogurt or a milk-based drink or a smoothie or something like that, a source of protein, something that's not going to fill you up too much and, you know, affect your ability to have your dinner. But if you're not having dinner within that 30 to 60 minutes after your training session, you definitely need to think about having something after your training. All right, so just 15 to 30 grams of protein. Like, as I said, dairy is one of the best, and it's not going to fill you up because it's a liquid, okay? All right, guys, thank you so much for listening in today. If you have any questions, I'll feel free to pop them up if you'd like. Otherwise, if you think of anything over the next few weeks, my next session will be talking more about how to eat during your tournaments, before a big event and things like that, and when you're away. But yeah, if you think of anything that you want to ask me, feel free, you can ask them at the next session as well. Okay, thanks very much, guys. Enjoy your week and good luck at your games. They're coming up soon, aren't they? Yeah. Okay, good luck at the games, guys. See you later.
Yeah, guys, there will be a short survey that comes out after that once this is ended, so if you could take your time to complete that, that would be fantastic. Thanks again, Jodie. Really appreciate it. Hope you all took something away from that. Fantastic information. See you soon, guys.